Good sounds are rarities, things that make your ears pop up when you hear it for the first time. Something unexpected. Part of being original, part of having a sound, is being able to create music or effects or processes that can't be recreated. That's what makes you unique. This class is just a good primer for anyone wanting to get involved more actively into, the production of electronic music. The way that I kind of communicate ideas might not be super anecdotal or funny or helpful, because I'll tell you right now, I'm pretty socially inept as is, and I'm just gonna go through my methodology of what I think when I'm creating melodies, or how I work when I'm systematically producing music. I'm not really afraid of giving away some arcane knowledge about my creation techniques, because this is more designed for you to develop your own, as opposed to just straight up ripping me. I would be pretty thrilled to know that at least one person took one thing away from this, which is pretty much what I hope people take away from my music. This is kind of what I do it, and you have to think that if you can impact one person, with your music, then it is pretty much worth it, I think, and that you are definitely doing something positive. This is deadmau5, and this is my masterclass. My creation process is, I like to deprive myself of sleep. I like to work from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. and the idea sometimes doesn't hit me, or more often than not, it actually does hit me around 3 to 4 a.m., and then, it's just weird. It's because my brain is in this weird euphoric state, I guess, of no sleep, that, I start thinking of, or not thinking, and start, kind of getting more experimental things done, and writing melodies, and just becoming more efficient at being not so critical, because I guess that's why you're not supposed to drive at 3, 4 in the morning after, having been up 24 hours prior, because your judgment's not there, or, you're not critically thinking about, driving. So, you might doze off, or you might just kind of fuzz out and do a thing. So it's but when you apply that to making music, it's, you're not inhibited by, some kind of stress that's going on that day, or something like that, or the stress of why this track isn't really working, and you're just kind of just doing it, and not contriving anything, And then sometimes that's just kind of the floodgate opens, and ideas come out, and you get them down, and you're like, wow, okay, now that's cool. And then you get excited about that, and you start working on it. Now, whether it's going to turn into one of those things where you're banging your head off the desk trying to get it finished, but that doesn't matter. It's just so rewarding to have come up with something that doesn't sound like the same, punching your head off the desk EDM kind of stuff. I disassociate music from almost everything, which is kind of strange, because a lot of people are a lot of other artists I know is, music's a feeling and it's this and that, and to me it's not. It's so disassociated from scenes, it's so disassociated from people's personal habits, and it's disassociated from body movement. I disassociate it from everything. I just emotionally cut the head off of music and then go at it from a let's just do it kind of a vibe. So, but that's just me. Other guys need that connection. They need the personal connection, and I don't even think about shit like that. So I get asked that question a lot. It's like, well, when you were making this, how did you feel, or how do you expect people to feel? And it's like, dude, that wasn't even in the neighborhood. It wasn't even in on the planet. I don't think songs, unless you're Neil Young. I mean, yeah, sure, that's storytelling within music and stuff like that. But EDM, I think it's pretty subjective. I mean, I could say that it was telling a story, and then I could impose that story on everyone, and then that would be the global opinion of the thing. But I like that people can take away different things from the same body of work. So that's the way I go about making music, because I'm just completely like... I never found myself humming a tune on the couch in my head and thinking, I got it, and I'm going to go in the studio and then do it. I just kind of just go and start doing it, and then the ideas form as I'm doing it, as opposed to me trying to form a pre-existing idea in my head. For me, I can't sit down and say and work on the beginning intro of a song and polish it and then have it all good and great, and then work after that and then do the middle section and then go to the end. I can't work in a linear fashion. When I start making music, I sit down at the computer and just start plotting out melody. I mean, because that's number one for me. Making a song is, the melodic structure of the whole thing, whether it's going to be like, the main phrase or hook, if you will. You just go in and create. Don't worry about the sound. Don't worry about, the mix or this and that and all these things, because, you want to hear this thing in all its glory as you're starting out, which is never going to happen. It's just laying down all the basics and maybe some minor rhythmic patterns or something like that, just to, keep the tempo or something for me to hear while I'm working on the melody. So none of that stuff's really important until, maybe like 3/4 through. And then the last quarter of the process would be, refining everything, and then actually using the sounds I want to use and the instruments that I want to use, and the drums and all that stuff I want to use. And then the last part is, coherently gluing it all together to mix it properly and kind of thing. So that's pretty much the process. 90% of my time is just goofing around and trying to come up with something than it is polishing something that I came up with. Mr. Potato Head EDM, I think I meant that. Like, well, a lot of music software today is widely accessible and available and, cheap, if not free. So, and of course you can go and grab these stock libraries of basically pre-made music and literally take, 2, 3, 4 bars of this and then some bars of that, and then just mix and match stuff, and then, print it and call it a day and say, hey, I made that, So that's what I think I meant by that. But then there's another way of doing that too, is if you're creating those parts, you could kind of use that for your own good, You create all these ideas, and then you create a folder or whatever, some kind of archival system, and start throwing all your bits in there. It's like when you're working on something and you do start polishing something up, and you're thinking, well, and you can grab this whole little recording or clip or whatever it is, and then you just stick it in there, and then there it is, and if you have a large enough collection of this stuff, and over 10 years of making music, you find you'll have a lot. You can just go into that folder system and grab what you want. Repetition in EDM is important if you want to get the thing done on time and on budget. That's a big one. I mean, repetition is good in the sense that I can write a whole song in less than 16 bars. Really, truly. I can do a whole track in less than 16 bars, and then once those 16 bars, which is like 23 seconds of music, is done, then it's all about arrangement. And it's arranging that 16 or even 8 or shit. If you're Eric Prydz, it's 4. It's all about just lengthening or duplicating that whole thing across the board and then arranging it, saying what comes in, what goes out, what gets modified, what gets unmodified, but it's all the same thing. That is so much easier than starting, your track and then trying to plot it all the way through, and then having constant change. As cool as that would be, I don't really hear that much because it would take a long time to wrap your head around. It only takes me like 2 or 3 days to write a track because even though it took me 10 to 12 hours to come up with this stupid melody that started on a note and then went up and down and did this thing and then ends on like a kind of resolve and then it sounds naturally being cycled, that takes time. But once I've done that, I feel so much better. I'm like elated. I'm like, oh, the track is done. And then it's like, everyone's like, what? It's only like maybe 16 beats long. And I'm like, I know, but it's done. It's done in my head. If I had any advice for, the upcoming producers, would be, you get on the map, honestly, by leading or by following. You really do. So, whoa, I almost made a mistake. You get on the map by, taking pieces of stuff that are out there, and I'm not talking about sampling, but ideas and structures and stuff like that, by drawing on what's doing it right now. And then once you're up there, that puts you in a position of power, if you will, to go and make changes. I copied from everyone. I copied from, melodically, I copied from Nine Inch Nails. I copied from a bit of that. And I think that was kind of a smart move on my part, because I knew that a lot of this house and electronic music at the time when I started was very euphoric, very pump up the jam, really, really like all major stuff. And I mean majors in key, it was all very uplifting and all that shit. And I was like, well, how come no one's really done anything more, minor sustained kind of stuff, minor sustained 7 notes and stuff like that. And I hear a lot of this, these quick appreciations of stuff. So I wanted to try and make something a little more melancholic in terms of melody that was more like a downer kind of feel, but keep that same tempo. And then instead of going so quick and sharp and fast with my appreciations on chord structures, I'll just dull them down to like slower 8th notes and make them a little more lush and brooding kind of thing. And I did that with a number of tracks, and those were the tracks that put me, on the map to start. Now, like I said, I wasn't doing anything as sonically amazing as, some of the other artists that were like, in their prime at that time that I was trying to be like. It wasn't even close. If I put the two mixes side by side of my first stuff that broke me out versus the stuff I listened to at the time, it was like night and day. It was like, I don't know what I'm fucking doing, and this he's got a really good engineer or something, I don't know. But melodically they were night and day, because this was more kind of bummed out shit, and this was like this super happy, yay, electro kind of thing. And then I calculated in my head that like, well, here's this now. It's like it should be a different style, and lo and behold, it kind of was at the time. And then I was able to release, maybe up to 1 album of that kind of stuff and get away with it without oversaturating my shit and then defining that as me, because again, I had to be put on the map, right? So it's like I got to do these things, and I have to do a set of them, maybe like 4 or 5 tracks, so that people can kind of get an idea, right, of not necessarily who I am in its entirety, but hey, I'm here, you know. Moving back to my point, is that borrowing this, you know, kind of melodic structure from Nine Inch Nails, and then borrowing some of this drum structure from, well, no one really, because it was just a kick on every quarter note. I think that's everyone ever. And kind of, you know, taking that idea and then applying it to, you know, what was being played at the time. That's what worked. And now I'm not saying go and do that, because it's already been done. So take the thing that hasn't been done before and then apply it in there, and then just try it out and see if it works, you know? The nature of electronic music is that, you know, it's something that you could do very, you know, solitary and have your own ideas and then just do that. So you see that a lot in electronic music. You don't see a lot of duos. And then when you do, well, how much of that is just, you know, his drinking buddy that just, you know, got in on the deal and doesn't do shit, you know? So then that happens too. I think electronic music helps, you know, personality like mine, because it's just, I'm not a team player. Like I can work with others and you know, and that kind of thing, but to me, it just always ends in, you know, disagreement about, like, you know, well, this chord, then that chord, and then you're kind of, you know, constrained to his ideas, and you're constrained to, or they're constrained to your ideas, kind of thing. So for me, it doesn't work. For others, it works brilliantly. So collaborations with me usually result in me having finished an idea, send it to someone else and say, hey man, well, it could use a keyboard solo on it that I just know I couldn't program that you could play better because you're a keyboardist, or and then we'll try that out, and then I'll see if I can integrate it and very mildly manipulate it myself afterwards, or something like that. But or a top line for a vocal or something like that. I've never, you know, written a track in tandem with the songwriter and then being, oh, you know, the key change should go here and that kind of thing. It's just like, no, here are the rules, here's the whole thing, and you make it work for that, and then I'll massage it back in. That's kind of how I work. Self-doubt could come from anywhere. It could come from just, you don't have to be a musician to know what self-doubt is, or anything of the sort, or even creative. You either are content with who you are and what you're doing and how you're doing it, or you're not, or sometimes you are, sometimes you aren't. But I mean, yeah, that definitely is going to affect the way that you do things, because you might be way overcritical of your idea, and then it's like, it sucks, but it's cool that I get that, because then, you know, I work at it more, you know, and I find that I know when I'm doing something and then ultimately I spent 2 hours on something that doesn't work. Well, no, I saved 2 hours next time I try to start it again, you know. So the process gets quicker, and then I know what ways to route audio signal and all that stuff to do it just right and nail it the way I want it, as opposed to trying to learn to do it again, you know? I know when an idea is good, and I know when it's bad, you know, and I know when to cut it off, when it's like, okay, this is just not happening for me. So just like stop beating your head off the desk and curb it and be done with it, or at least put it in the stupid folder of ideas, you know. Sometimes I kick the dead horse a little too long, and that sucks, but that's just part of the process. And then you can't just discount it as time wasted. You discount it as, you know, time experience gained, you know. Nothing's ever really finished, you know. You're just satisfied with the result, because I mean, I could go back to any of my releases and make them better, or change something, or, you know, or take something out, or put something different in. They're never done. So just, you know, so they're like good enough. and then let it sit before you do anything with it, before you upload it to your SoundCloud or whatever. Just let it sit for a couple days and then go back at it like 2 or 3 more times, and then just have a listen through and then just see if you can hear anything different. Or there's going to be a threshold, of course, where it's just like, all right, it's done. I don't have, the ability, like I'm not a pianist, so I can't just sit down at a piano or a MIDI keyboard and wire it up to, my workstation and then play the chord and then the next chord and the next chord and that chord. I can't even do that. The way I work on songs from start to finish in their entirety are like always in little pieces here and there. It just doesn't go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. What happens is I'll draw a root note, and then another note, and then just have like the bass notes, right? And then I'll layer on, some counter melody notes with it, and then go from the last chord to the second chord to the first chord, then to the third chord, and then just keep juggling around until it's complete. You can go in here and then just start, plotting away your melody. So here's where you would either hook up a MIDI controller and go in and, play the notes that you know how to play, or you could simply just draw them in. So there I've got a root set up. But I'm way out of sync here. So I'm just going to dodge some stuff around. And then, I do this pretty quick now, but, before it was a little cumbersome using the mouse and keyboard and all that stuff. But it's just becoming familiar with your DAW and knowing that, you want that up an octave. Well, I could sit here and then go up an octave. Or if, the shortcut, you just hit shift and then one of these arrows now, and you're just going in intervals. So it's really handy to, become super familiar with the tools that you're using, because, they're all designed to save time and do all this stuff. So, and then once I kind of have a bass structure set in, I'll change the patch here to something stupid. And increase the polyphony on that. And then just start doing some... Or, that's not right. And then, so then that's how I kind of come up with my chord structures here. Oh, but then I want a major there. Sure, why not? And then drop that down a seventh. Oh, yeah. So I have 3 chords, right? No particular time or anything. I'm gonna shut that metronome off because it drives me crazy more often than not. Okay, so that's a kind of like this is how I would start a song. So there you have your kind of your root chord there. I wouldn't begin shaping any kind of sound or style out of it. I just... So I kind of like the way that those notes go together. So then it comes about phrasing, right? So what you actually can do, and this is what I find these most useful for, is going into like a sound library, like this Vengeance guys. This is all they do, is they shit out these music libraries or drum loop libraries. So they just stuff like that I just basically use as temporary metronomes, if you will. So actually, there's a lot of websites out there, too, where you like splice.com that just have terabytes upon terabytes of libraries from different, musicians and artists that go in and they create these loop libraries where you can go and download, this or that. And so at the end of the day, you're going to get like stuff like this where And then it's, of course, you got to spend some time to go and find something that moderately works, but just for humor's sake, we'll use this. And what this is going to do is it's just going to keep a time for me. Okay, great, cool. Sad part is it's half a track right there. Now I use that loop not to print in my production because that's just lazy as hell. I mean, you can do that, and lots of people do, shockingly enough. But I'm just going to use that as just kind of a bed or a thing to hold time, so I know where these chords are going to go. So I'm just going to kind of shift these out for a second, and then okay. So I know I want my first chord to go there, and then the second chord there. And then, shit, I don't know. And then that's going to get carried on to the end of those 4 bars. So you're like halfway done your theme right there. So I'm going to consolidate that within the DAW. And you're going to learn all these tricks within the DAW. So it's like, Control J, it basically takes like a whole thing and consolidates it into one big clip. Ableton, you'll find, is very like clip based. And then actually they all are more or less kind of clip based. So now I have this series of, 4 bars here that's just doing that. Now it needs a resolve, or it doesn't. I don't know. I feel it should because that's just my taste. But okay, and then go down for the root just for a second half, and then we'll call it that. I mean, you could go to town on this and do the whole track, but let's go minor, I guess, because it's the fashionable thing to do. All right. See, that's my life right now, because if I could just play it, I'd play it, but I can't, so I have to draw it. Okay, cool, good enough. So there's a 8-bar loop. And then now that I've kind of got something in there, I'm just gonna mute that loop there because now I know where the timing sits at everything. Now alternately, you can just use anything just as long as you know where the thing is. And now you're setting tempo. Oh, well. Missed that note. Oh, my fucking, sorry. Sure, good enough. Now you can find kind of where your bass is gonna sit. That's what I see. So these are the root notes here, basically, meaning that these are all gonna get like, either octave down or something for a bass line to follow or something like that. This is just one synth. I guess what I would do is then kind of figure out where it should sit in what key so I can bring it down. Okay, yeah, sure. And then, I'm just trying to find that low note, and that's something I do, something that resonates well. And it's usually around like, D, C to F kind of range of 1, which is pretty low note. Like, shit, I wish I knew that the frequency of that, whatever D sharp 1 is. It's just about extends my knowledge of audio frequency. But I don't know, it's maybe to me around like 80 hertz, 80, 90, which is like not quite sub, but it's still pretty low. Sub being the frequencies that you don't really hear but kind of feel. So if I pull another octave down on that and do what I was supposed to do before and increase the polyphony on this. You don't have to do this with most synths because this is actually not commercially available, but all synths do this. There you go. So now you got that sub note. Now, within this plugin, and this is like any synth, you're going to have things like, frequency, resonance, and envelopes, and all these different little options like unison. Now, this is no different than that. It's just all the wires are already connected in here, and by, switching options on and off and stuff like that is just like, pulling a plug in and out of that thing. So this isn't really about synthesizing and making cool patches and engineering the sound. This is just more about music making, so, and the way I do it. So now another thing I want to do, if I want to break that up, because maybe there's a part where, you don't want this whole drone going on through the whole arrangement. There are a whole number of different ways to kind of switch it up. And one would be like using an arpeggiator. Again, every DAW would have one of these. And they're basic ones, and then there are like super more complicated ones, like another plugin we wrote called Cthulhu and stuff like that. But just for demonstration's sakes, an arpeggiator will take that whole idea there and it'll arpeggiate the notes. So now it's going to go through the phrase just note by note. And then, of course, different ways of doing that, like, on 16th notes. And then once that's like one way to do it. And then, of course, when you kind of, okay, well, I like that pattern. I want to work with that, so give it some envelope and then change some of the parameters on that. This is just a quick and dirty way to do it. I don't know. And then it comes down to, throwing other effects. Most DAWs come with like their own set of built-in plugins. Like Ableton Live comes with like a ton of like effects and stuff. So here I've got a bit of reverb on it. I'm just going to pitch it up a bit. But the point is that once you have this track structure and the melody all laid out and stuff like that, it's good to have it like, in full format like that, and then drag it off as a clip so that you'll never lose the whole phrase, and can take it all sorts of different directions with, your post-processing. That's kind of how I start. And what I'll do is I'll just call this like, I don't know, idea, mass. Spell. This is good practice. I don't normally do this, but I think everyone should do this, so I don't necessarily always practice what I preach. Okay, so now here's my like big bank of crap. Like I've just got all these clips and ideas and things. So whether this track gets finished or not, like for the sake of this, doesn't really matter. So here I got this folder called August 2017 and whatever. So I'm going to take this clip, and you can do this with Ableton, or you could do it with Cubase, whatever you want. Like, you can export this as MIDI data, and MIDI data is universally known throughout every DAW, right? But within Ableton, you don't necessarily have to do that because it has its own proprietary clip format, so you don't have to export MIDI or anything like that. So since we're only working in Ableton right now, I can take this and then drop it in here. So now I've got this thing called Idea Masterclass. Right, so which is just that. And, you know, and whether this goes anywhere or not past this thing, I can actually open up, let me open up something I was working on the other night. And this is what really helps me in writing music, is if I get so stuck on an idea. It's the slowest, fastest computer you can buy. This one. Fucking A. Well, no, it's got, this project had a ton of shit on it. Ah, there we go. Okay, so, okay, cool, like a drum pattern in there that I can probably solo out, maybe. Well. Okay, so that's all like one big drum thing. Now, if I was so, get rid of all this shit. Oh, it's thinking. Okay, so I had this, like, you know, drums from one track. I could just take my clip over, and this translates from every other DAW, and then I can just throw it in there. So now I have, and of course, then you start getting into, you know, things like compression and stuff like that. So just for demo's sake, because if you want to have that sit in there a little nicer, we'll just get a sidechain from one of my kicks. I don't know which one. Let's just try that one. That's better. All right. Okay, great. You know, and that's kind of what I mean by the potato head EDM thing, except for you can actually buy content like that and then just stitch it together and then call it your own, oddly enough. But I mean, I do it too, but I do it with all the content and clips that I've made. Now, I literally shat that out without even thinking about it, because I know in my head, certain notes resonate together nice and certain notes don't. But if you can't distinguish between what works and what doesn't, like I said, all the amount of gear and stuff or whatever is not going to help your case. So I don't know. I think I've just been fortunate to train myself in listening to music enough to know, you know, what sounds good and what doesn't, not in terms of the whole phrase, but what notes go together and what notes don't, you know, which kind of traps you in a weird way, because then all your shit starts to sort of sound the same, but I guess that's what makes you you, right? That's kind of roughly how I would put together a track. You could do this in your fucking bedroom. You really could. I've heard absolutely disgusting shit come out of some really high-end studios, and I've heard some amazing shit come off some little kid's laptop in LA. I think I signed one. Ultimately, you're going to end up in the digital realm, no matter what. Whether you're a guitarist, a cellist, you know, you play the fucking jazz flute, doesn't matter. You're gonna end up on a computer at some point in digital format. Not just because, you know, digital format's better. I mean, in terms of portability, yeah, it is better, because, you know, how were you planning on distributing your music on cassette? You know, that this whole argument about, oh, we record in analog, oh, we record in digital, oh, we record, you know, on a gramophone, doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, your delivery method's digital. That's just the way it is. Now, it might not be the ultimate, most fidelic thing, you know, like 24-inch tape could provide sonically, but I mean, if you want your stuff on, you know, on a TV show or synced in a film or rebroadcasted else on other radio shows or uploaded on the internet or on iTunes, it's going to be digital. So capturing that sound is going to be locked to the digital domain no matter what. So you might as well become nice and cozy with that, whether you're a pianist or a computer synth guru kind of thing. First things first is you got to get a good little computer, and that could be, you know, anything from a cheap laptop to, you know, a decent sized Mac or a PC, either or. All these apps are all cross-platform, so Mac, PC, whatever. I just prefer PC because I don't know, I like it. I can get in under the hood a lot more often on a PC than I could on a Mac. But then when you kind of start to get a little more serious into it, you're going to need a good DAC, which is a digital audio converter. I've been using RME DACs forever. I think investment-wise, it was like the best thing I ever bought was like, a good ASIO PCI card from RME, and it just had 8 ins, 8 outs, which was more than enough because I only, even to this day, really only need one stereo set of inputs at a time, unless you start patching crazy amounts of gear, and then you're going to need sick IO for that. But to get started, like a 4x4, 4 ins, 4 outs, or even 2 in, 2 out, like the Echo MIA, which I think is discontinued, but there's a whole bunch of similar products out there. But the point is that it should be a dedicated audio processing card, and not the one built into your motherboard and stuff like that, just because that's not, the drivers for it and all that stuff just aren't up to par to handle the throughput of having all these VSTs and running them in really low latency. That's like the first thing you need to get started. To start producing music on your own, you're going to need a digital audio workstation no matter what. And that can be anywhere from, $200 copy of Fruity Loops to, an $800 copy of Cubase or Wavelab or Ableton. There's all sorts of options out there, Bitwig and stuff. So, there's a lot of DAWs that behave differently, and but they all kind of are the same under the hood in the effect of, you can import audio data, it can record audio, it has MIDI and has VST support. They all do. You're going to have to experiment, and I'm not saying, you have to go out and buy 30 DAWs and start screwing around with them, but I can guarantee you about 99.9% of all of them are all going to have trial versions that you can go and grab, and you just might not be able to export something or something the other, but nothing's off limits if you have an internet connection and a computer that supports that kind of stuff. So experimenting in terms of software is like a great idea. So you just have to go and find which one, not the one you're most comfortable with, and then pick that one, because that's a lot of, that just sets you up for failure right there, because then you're at the mercy of this DAW, and you're locked into what this DAW's workflow is. So your workflow is going to kind of play off of the features of one guy's software. So your ideas are basically being constrained and controlled by a few developers and not, the whole entirety. So the more that you play with, the more you can expect to be able to do in any of them. As far as hardware synths go, the first kind of all-rounder synth that I bought that I found really useful in a lot of my productions was the Access Virus TI, it was called, and they make a desktop version of that. That's like super cheap-ish, but just all the sonic possibilities I got out of that thing was great. My first kind of upgrade when I started to make money was to buy an actual synth. I went out and got a rack mount Moog Voyager, which was like, basically at that time the cheapest Moog you could get, but it wasn't cheap by a long shot when you were making like $700 a week or something like that. And I didn't worry about, having a Portico MVP or a Eventide or a Weiss, until way later in my career, this is all just super nitpicking at this point. I wouldn't recommend doing this on headphones. Open ear is the best reference you're going to get. Headphones from model to model can just be so deceiving. Even with really high quality listening headphones, like the really expensive Sennheiser HD800s, like those are pretty top of the line headphones, and I find that it doesn't quite reproduce the sound that you're going to hear in an acoustic space because it doesn't simulate that acoustic space at all. It goes directly into your ears. It's okay for sketching out ideas at low levels, but in terms of your hearing health, I wouldn't recommend it, because as you start to make music or you're listening to music, you have a tendency to keep turning up the gain, and it's kind of like a frog in a boiling pot. Or if you put a frog in a boiling pot of water, it's going to jump right out. It's just like if you get into a room and it's blasting, you're like, oh shit, and you have to leave because it's like 110, 120 dB, which is insanely loud. But if you put the frog in a lukewarm, it'll just kind of sit there, and as you heat it up, that frog's not going to jump out of the pot. He's just going to sit there and simmer and get used to it, and then he's going to boil and die. And I mean, ultimately, that's kind of what'll happen to your ears too, is you get used to hearing like 70 dB, but then you're like, oh, it's a little quiet. And you keep riding the volume up and up and up and up. And then you take your headphones off, and you'll notice if you've been working for a really long time, like 4 hours, and then you've been doing that, and you actually walk out, take a 5-minute break, walk back in, don't change a thing, put those headphones on and hit it, you'll actually be thrown back by how loud you were listening it to. It's just a thing you really shouldn't do, and you're more prone to hearing damage through headphones than a pair of controlled monitors. Monitors I get questioned about a lot, actually, and what I'm running here are these like crazy ATCs, which are like super transparent and super expensive, but you don't need that. But you do need monitors that meaning that you could go out and get a pair of like KRK Rocket 8s, or they're pretty reasonably priced, or M Audio stuff, or anything. But when you're monitoring, making your own music and stuff like that, you should really listen to and get familiarized with the stuff that you like to hear in your car or wherever on those monitors. So I don't know, I listen to my own stuff because I know it on different sets of monitors, and then I'll know how to like kind of compensate my mix to make it match. So the options are pretty much endless when it comes to choosing monitors that work for you. But the idea is to be in a room that is pretty small, and non-parallel walls would be great, just because the sound bounces, so if it's bouncing off the back of a wall and coming back, you're hearing all these weird reflections and stuff like that, and it doesn't really hinder a lot of the writing process, but the mixing and mastering, it might get a little weird there. Having a separate sub is a good idea too, but you have to be really careful with that, because a lot of guys I know that have separate subs sometimes drive too much signal to the sub for when they're mixing or mastering. If you're making music, it doesn't really matter. But when it comes down to fine tuning the process, it would, because you can easily go way too heavy on the sub. But then when you play it back on another system, like you don't want to test your mix out in a club or something like that, it could just be like overloaded with sub, because the way that you made it, it sounded good in your room, but it just didn't translate on a tuned system. So you got to be careful with that. So that's why I like working at low volumes. Like my maximum listening level is maybe like 85 dB. That's about 85 dB. Now, so like 85 decibels in this room isn't perceived to be very loud, but it actually is. If you listen to that at this level for like about 20 minutes, your ears will start ringing, and it sounds really quiet, but it's not. But anyway, around there is kind of like what I mix at on the top end, because if you start really like driving the mix, and then you feel it in your chest and all that stuff, you get like what's called like listening fatigue, believe it or not. And your hearing will detenuate over a course of time, like being at a really loud concert. That's just good practice. It's good for your ears, and And they'll thank you for that when you're about as old as Phil Collins. You can totally make a professional sounding track in a bedroom studio. Like, people do it all the time. I mean, wait for fucking Skrillex's masterclass. He'll laptop you up and down the fucking block. But I'm serious, he will, because that's all he uses, you know? And you can get really creative with all this in-the-box stuff. So there's a very blurry line between, you know, kind of what I'm doing and, you know, with all this shit, and then what you can just do using plugins, you know? Because it's like, I hate to say it, but, you know, a lot of people don't care that, you know, they're listening to 128 kilobit MP3 files when there's full 16-bit 44.1. And you would be awkwardly surprised of how many people can't hear the difference, which is heartbreaking in a sense, but it is what it is. So the process of what you're using, you know, has obviously been debunked to shit, but what people do lack is the ideas, the forming of the melodies and all that kind of stuff. That's all super important shit, because whether you're in the fucking $2 million room with every fucking synth, or you're in on a laptop or whatever, if you don't have the ideas, you know, and the melodic structure and to know what notes sound good together, then you're fucked either way, dude, you know? So that's really refreshing to know, like, I would imagine if you were doing this on a budget. So this is like just some free thinking stuff here. I'm just going to tighten this up real quick. Okay, so I got 3 notes that kind of harmoniously go together because okay. So that would be my first 2 bars of something. So that's a cycle in itself, but there's no key change in there. So what I would instinctively do is, you know, duplicate that. And so you have that. Now you've got a 4-bar kind of melody going, but you want a key change. But so now I know the top note should be this, so I'm going to put that in the same spot, and then bring that first note down. Well, now see, that's a change. Now, a bad cycle, I can tell you right now, would be, since now we're looking at 8 bars, yeah, see, now that doesn't resolve to me. Now, when I'm doing this kind of thing over 8 bars, what I'm actually looking at is this last bar and this first bar. So what I want to do is just listen to the... So the only way that would resolve as it is now, without it changing completely, is make this minor now. So now I know that... See that? Now that's... To me, that makes more sense than going from that minor to major. Now I'm going from minor to minor, which makes more sense. I think it's actually just a different interval of that exact same chord. So now that I know that those two are on, now I can go ahead and fix. See, now those two don't really go well together, so it's finding that this just seems to be the only offender at this point. These two seem fine together. The last one and the first one seem fine together, and then it's like that third one is just like way out and. But these two seem to go together, so it's kind of a weird mystery you have to unravel. And this is standard structure too. So this is going to go, well, in terms of length, right? This is going to be 8 bars. So, it's divisible by, 2 all the time. So things I do like to end up doing in tracks is if I know that, I know these two kind of resolve. So I could kind of try something new here and instead, and I do this with a few of my tracks actually, is make a 6 bar. So now your whole main phrase is being offset by 2 bars every time the thing loops around, because if you put a quarter note kick in there, you're going to get see, you would want that extra one there, but instead it's going to jump back to the second and then just keep doing that. And then, of course, I think it's going to be a total of 6 sets of that until it resets to 16. So, I mean, that's how I sometimes do it, or I'll even go, I never really go 5 bars, but I will go 4 and sometimes, 3 bars and stuff like that. But, rarely I do that because just the time doesn't fit half the time. Oh, but this is a 4-bar loop, or sorry, a 5-bar. But, hey, I mean, I wouldn't turn it down, but that's the kind of my go-to for melody creation is looking at the first phrase and looking at the last phrase and then slowly closing in the loop with everything in between, because if it doesn't resolve properly, then all that other shit in the middle doesn't fucking matter, like if it's good or bad or whatever, because it's going to be bad when it comes back around. So I mean, that's one tip I could take to the bank, is always listen for that resolve between the end of your cycle to the beginning. Another thing I do a lot too is I keep what's called a drone note. This is a fun exercise too that I like to do when creating music, and you hear it a lot. Actually, you'll hear it most prevalently in My Pet Coelacanth. Actually, I'll open up that file because that's a really good example of that. Okay, what's this? So this whole track was written with one note. What I had done here is used Absinthe, which is just, another VSTI synth from Native Instruments, patent pending. So what I did is, the way I started this song is I literally just played this one note. And I call that my bass, my drone. And then what I do after that is I went in and I took another basic synth, affected it a bit, but, not much. And I've written notes all around that drone. So I knew that chord worked. that one works, and then so on. But I had that one reference pitch because I knew for sure if you have a drone note going the whole way, you can't fuck up the result because it's the same note. So actually, well, let's try writing something completely different with that same drone. This is why I like having a reference drone in there. And what I'll do is sometimes I'll write to a drone and then just take the drone out. And then, you have something without that. And then it stands on its own legs without the drone. I just thought the drone was interesting in the track, so I kept it in. So what I can do now is delete all that and then go listen to that root pitch. So now I can go. Drop down. Oh, that's gonna come up. Ah, see, that didn't work. That does. See, and it's making adjustments to make sure that the drone note fit with. But if it doesn't, then it's okay to delete the drone, because even though that didn't quite work with that drone note going, if you don't have the drone note playing, then that's okay. So a lot of inspiration comes out of writing to a single note, but of course you're locked to a very specific amount of things and notes and intervals. And then, to make a really long cycle less boring, it's just stacking on harmonies. So you'll start to hear more harmonies get introduced as the thing went on, because this was an insanely long breakdown, and it's just the way I wanted it. So this is the same as this, just stacked with more harmonies, which you'll hear right here. Carry that on through the main theme of the track, but what I chose to do for this track is just take small pieces of these chords and then, like, not randomly, but like, place them in odd positions and arpeggiate them, so you get this. I was missing some synths, but those are the same chords that we're just playing, but just in sporadic order with little bits of one synth playing one part, another synth playing another part. So once you have your core phrase down, the rest is all pretty simple because it's just variations of that. There's two types of music production too. One, it's pleasing yourself, and then it's pleasing the crowd. And if you're doing one or the other, that's fine. But it's hard to do both. So crowd pleasing stuff is stuff that is kind of the sing along formulaic, like clap your hands at this part, like how it goes, sing the words and do this song and dance stuff. And then pleasing yourself is kind of like writing music that is arranged in such a way that you like, but might not sit well with everyone else, you know. But if you don't do that left field stuff, you're not going to stand out, you know. And you can kind of tell when you're out there doing something for the first time or playing a song for the first time to a crowd if they're into it or not, you know. I had recently just started playing, you know, snow cone at massive dance festivals and stuff like that. And no, I don't get the rage like of seeing a sea of people doing this, you know, as I do when I'm playing Ghosts and stuff or Raise Your Weapon or whatever. But, you know, you can kind of see some, you know, humming and hawing up in the front row. But you got to just realize that, you know, and I can't help but feel, oh man, I'm a little bummed out that they're not digging this. But you know what? Who fucking cares? I can shit out melodies in my sleep day and night. I could do this all day and probably come up with a million things that a million people would like. But I want it to resonate with me as something that I've done that I haven't done before, or is, you know, audibly pleasing to me, you know, whether it's not just a straight 3 basic chord pop riff, you know, that would immediately get binned because it's just too obvious, you know, and I need something that's not obvious. So something you hear in a lot of my albums and works are chord structures that shouldn't make sense, that do make sense. And the question I get is, how did you come up with it? And I'm like, well, I didn't really come up with it. I developed it.